Hey everyone, and happy summer solstice. And today I thought, what can I do to make this day a little special? Because I've been pretty wound up with schoolwork and really stressed out, and things have been tight. And I wanted to just do something nice today. And I thought, for a while now, I've been wanting to make some coconut kefir because the batch that I have is on its last leg. And it took me a while to get these guys. These are young coconuts, young Thai coconuts. And these guys, the water inside, I like to ferment it and make kefir out of it. And then as for the coconut meat on the inside, I like to use that to make coconut milk. So I'm going to show you today how to do both of those things, starting with the coconut kefir. Okay guys, so for this method of getting at the coconuts to open, I'm going to show you the method that I've learned and I find works very well. It requires a large chef's knife like this, and what you do when you find these guys, you'll notice that some of the white husk is still sitting on top. So all I do, and actually they'll always be wrapped with like this plastic wrap, which I think is because they soak these things in God knows what chemicals, so they don't go, I don't know why actually, but that's what I've been told. So I just kind of take off this outer layer of plastic with my knife, and after doing that, get that out of the way. I usually like to do this over my sink because then I can just pick up the deposits afterwards. And what I do is I scrape off the white fleshy part, not fleshy part, but like the hull, just so I can expose fully the husk underneath. One of the things I want to mention is that you have to know how to pick out young coconuts when you're at the store, and usually I find these in Asian grocery stores. The best method that I've learned is simply to look at usually the bottom of the coconut, and when you start seeing like pinkish, brownish, when you see those colorations, usually a sign that the coconuts are older and it could have been spoiled. In fact, I'm a little fearful of how well these ones will be because they are already a bit dark. Unfortunately, this is what I had available at the time, and they've been in my fridge for 2 days. But when you open the inside and you see the flesh, if it's turned a pinkish color, then you know it's spoiled, and at that point I wouldn't use the meat. And whether you want to use the coconut water to drink or not, well, that's your call. I probably wouldn't. Now, I've kind of exposed more or less the top here. The trick to this with the chef's knife is get it in at about halfway to 1/3 near the top, and you're going to angle your knife at a 45-degree angle with the flat end like this, and then all you do is wedge it in as much as you can. You take the other end with your hand and you make sure that the end of the handle is not protruding out, otherwise when you hit it you're going to hurt your other hand. So you do with your fingers raised slightly above, and then this hand is going to smack down on that hand. And people always kind of make fun of me when I do this, but I do like to charge my chi energy for this because I find that actually allows me to penetrate this a lot more easily as opposed to just going brute force, not always getting it that way. So get your 45-degree angle, charge your chi, and there you go. So you see it penetrates the hull, and then after that point, if it didn't go in enough, which it didn't quite here, I'll hit it a second time. There we go. So now that's in. All you have to do now is lift up. You don't have to really do much other than just lift up itself, and the top will come right off. And I can tell this coconut's actually pretty old because the top is supposed to stay completely intact, but it's starting to break apart. So this one might be bad, we'll see in a second. If I continue lifting up, top will come right off. And you can rotate around a little bit if you need to. And I'm just opening the rest with my hand. Usually I wouldn't need to. Okay, so here's the color. I'm going to see if this how it shows on the camera. It's fairly white. There's no pinkish, but I can tell that it's almost starting to get like a darker, opaque white. So if this was sitting around any longer, it'd probably start to turn pink soon. But it's still good. And now once we have this open, what we do is we need to drain it. So you want to have a glass nearby. A tall glass works well. And then you're going to be really gently take up your coconut, put the glass upside down over top of it, and this you have to turn over really quick so that the liquid falls inside the glass and not outside on the sink. Here we go. There we go. This is actually a pretty small coconut. I only got probably about a cup's yield. Sometimes you get a cup and a half or even up to 2 cups, depending on the size of the coconut. So the meat we're going to use for later to make the milk, so I'll set that aside. I got another coconut. Usually I do a batch of 2 when I ferment to make kefir, and I'm going to open this one up as well. Okay, so next step of the process. The method that I'm going to be using for this is using a slow cooker or a crock pot. Using this at the keep warm or lowest setting so that it keeps the temperature of the kefir at about 30 degrees Celsius, which is where coconut water needs to be at in order to ideally ferment. So the way that I like to do this is I take a little bit of my old batch, which is this one here, and I add this as basically a starter base, which, by the way, I'm putting in a large, really large mug that is ceramic. And this starter, in my view, helps with accelerating and giving extra potency to the end product for the fermented kefir. So with that in there, all I have to do after that is grab our coconut water that we collected from the coconuts, and here it is. So that's going to be poured in, and if you want, you can actually strain this if you found that there's any particles or anything that got in there. Otherwise, I don't find it really makes a difference. So that goes in. And what we want to do then is add a little bit more starter culture so that we get some fresh bugs to eat the sugar that's in the coconut water. I'm using 2 strains or 2 different products here to kind of make shift with my own blend of probiotics. So this one here is by Advanced Nutritional Resource. It's I don't even know if they're still around. I got this a while back. And you do store these in the freezer to prolong their life. This one has 4 strains of L. plantarum. Actually, I lied. There's a lot more strains in here. But this is good because the more diversity that you get, then the more functions can potentially be fulfilled inside our gastrointestinal tract, both in the colon and the intestine, and just about everywhere along our GI. So I don't use too much because it's not a lot of coconut water, so I probably do like a 1/4 teaspoon. And also I like to put in a little bit of Donna Gates Body Ecology Kefir Starter. This one I use about the same amount, which is about a 1/4 teaspoon. I believe this is available on her website. I still have some available that I got a while back. I only use a little bit. I don't use a whole sachet because it's not a lot of water, as I said before. So those go in, and we'll get that stirred in a second. I have the second coconut that I haven't drained of the water yet, so that's right here, and I'm going to repeat the process like before. Sweet, got a little bit more water out of this one. So here's the water. Actually, this one I'm going to filter because I do see a little bit of particles from the husk, so I'm going to do that before putting it in. Alright, so here's our trusty filter. Put that over top, pour the water in, and done. With that said, you want to give this a little bit of a stir, and anything that has microorganisms in there, I've been told that the metal is something that you do not really want to come in contact with them, so I like to use wooden or bamboo utensils, and I give that a gentle stir just until everything is pretty much dissolved. And so when that is done, we're going to put this in the crock pot, and then I'll show you what to do after that. Okay, now that everything's been nicely dissolved into the water, what we do is take a little bit of plastic wrap like this and cover it. This is just to keep the mixture isolated from any of the stuff that's in the environment, and make sure that it's nicely tucked. And the other nice thing as well with this is you actually see the work in progress, because as the temperature ferments these guys, then the plastic starts to kind of bubble up, and this, as the pressure builds up from the excretions of the organisms that are in here. So that's pretty good. This goes inside the crock pot, and one of the things I like to do is put a little plate inside the crock pot so that this isn't sitting directly on top of the base, where it would be a little bit warmer, because we're not going for heat so much, just an ambience of temperature. So once that's in there, just take another cup and get some hot water from your tap. And you find that you're probably not going to need a lot, just a few glasses, and then gently pour it in. You want to make sure that you're covering about an inch of the base, up to the base of the container that you're using. This will be just enough to keep the ambient temperature where it needs to be without getting too hot, because if we were to cover this with all water all the way to the top, my experience in the past has been that it just gets too hot, and that might damage or kill some of the organisms that are in there. And this helps to keep the product at an ideal temperature the entire time. So I've got about an inch cover there. That's all I need. And then crock pots usually have a keep warm setting, which is the lowest temperature, and I'll leave it there. And what I'll do probably in just a few hours, I actually have a little thermometer to check the temperature, and it'll verify for me if it's around the 30 degrees Celsius mark. And up to that point, I will let this ferment for probably about, it depends a little bit. Usually I would probably go for up to 3 days. It gets a little bit stronger as it ferments longer. However, because I'm putting in a little bit of the starter from my old batch, it might actually only need 2 days, sometimes even less. So it's always a little bit different depending how much went in, maybe how much sugar concentration is in there, the overall temperature that things were at. So there's a lot of variables, but you can, as you go, taste it. Like, give it at least a day and a half or 2 days. If you haven't started anything before, then give it at least, I would say, 3 days, and try it. It should taste like a little bit of frizziness to it, and that'll tell you that the sugars have already been converted into all the byproducts that the kefir will render for you. So try that out. And as far as consumption goes, if you're not used to probiotics, you might want to start with just small amounts and then work your way up. Small amount might be maybe just an ounce to start, or 2 ounces, and then just see how you feel. Sometimes people aren't really very connected to their body and might not notice anything, or some people might have a reaction where they get a little bit of the runs and diarrhea or some kind of discomfort, in which case you want to back up a little bit of how much you're using. This is true for probiotics if you're taking them as a supplement, or even just from fermented foods in general. The reason that I'm doing this is because it's part of my process to crowd out the pathogenic organisms that are inside of me, not just with supplements, but also with probiotic foods. And this kefir is an easy thing that you can do at home without having to go buy really expensive products in order to fulfill that task. So that's pretty much it for the kefir. Next thing we're going to do is use the coconut meat and make some coconut milk. So that's next. Alright, so here we are with our empty coconuts with the meat on the inside. And the young coconut meat tends to be rather soft. Sometimes it gets a little harder, but usually should be soft enough that's relatively easy to scoop out with a spoon. If it's not, sometimes you'll have to, or at least that might be more handy, to use a tool like this. Mind you, I have no idea what this is called. Call it a coconut meat scooper. And this allows you to go in there and actually wedge it out. And it works, I think it's intended primarily for the brown or old coconuts. That's really difficult otherwise to take out. But because this is relatively soft, a metal spoon should be easy enough to simply go in there and just kind of rotate around and scoop it out. And if you get any of the brown that's on the kind of like the inner bark. You can go through the trouble of taking that out. Usually I don't care to, but this should be an easy process. If it's not, and you find yourself really hard pressed to get at all the meat that's on the inside, then that young coconut, I guess, might not be so young, and the meat has already hardened somewhat into more of almost not as hard, but near its consistency of the brown coconuts. In which case, I'm not going to lie, it is very hard and time consuming to actually get it all in. But this is like a kind of easy, no mess approach to getting this done, as opposed to grabbing a machete or an axe like I used to do and try to break this in half. Such a messy process, let me tell you. This works much better. As you can see, I just kind of loosened it all out, and then I'm just going to put it in a glass for now. I'm going to transfer it to the blender afterwards. And you can just even do this and it all falls right out. So that's the first coconut. I'm going to put both in here, and then I'll show you the next step of readying for our coconut milk. Okay, so I've transferred the meat over into the Vitamix container here. High-speed blender definitely goes a long way for this. And both the coconuts gave me just about a cup worth of meat, and depending on how thick and creamy you want it or how watery you want it, this is going to determine how much water you put in. Before I do that, I'm going to put in some spices. This is going to be some pretty awesome coconut milk. The first spice I'm going to add in is a cardamom pod. I don't know if the camera can pick that up there. Just one pod. I find this stuff is very strong, but it gives a really nice flavor. So I just open it up and tug the seeds out of the shell and pour them into the container. Make sure that those blend up really well so that they distribute the flavor and you don't get any chunks of it, because that would be pretty strong to bite into. You don't have to sweeten in any way, but I do like to add just a little tiny bit of stevia powder. Really not a lot, because this stuff is very strong. Just green ground up stevia leaf. You could even use a little bit of maple syrup if you wanted, or honey, whatever suits your fancy. As well, you might not see this coming, but a little bit of turmeric. This, if you're not used to it, you probably don't want to use very much. I myself, I'm just going to put a small amount. And turmeric, I find a great companion for turmeric is just a dash of black pepper. And that's it. Now this is going to be a cacao flavored coconut milk, so of course we need some cacao. I'm going to put in 3 teaspoons to start. And if I find that I want more cacao flavor afterwards, I can always do that. That's 3. And our next ingredient is going to be Ceylon cinnamon powder. I really like this stuff. I'm going to go in for a full teaspoon of that. And in we go. Now there's other things we could add. I could even add a date to sweeten. In fact, I think I'm going to add in 1 date as well. So here's our mid-joule dates. Just take the core out and put in the meat. There we go. And that's going to be our main ingredients. All we need now is the water. So usually I probably go for about a ratio of 1 to 3. So I got 1 cup of the solid ingredients, and today I'm going to go for about 2.5 cups of water, and hopefully get a little bit of a thicker texture. The nice thing about this is that it really emulsifies itself together well. You don't need to add in anything to get it to stick together and prevent that separation that often happens, like when you make nut milks and stuff like that. So I do like using coconut for making coconut milk. Other options that work well are macadamia nuts as well as cashews, all of which you would soak beforehand, because a really high fat content just makes this work really well. So all that stuff's in there. Cap goes on. Remember, with one of these blenders, you want to start off really slow and then work your way up from there. about 30 seconds ought to do it, I figure. Gently take that out, and I'm gonna try this out and see what it tastes like. Alright, so this is actually somewhat more watery than I had wanted, but that's okay. It really is more like a milk than a cream. Guys, that is really, really good. Not very sweet at all, but you know what? You can use this for like a cereal in the morning, or put in. I'm going to be cutting in some strawberries tomorrow morning for breakfast and putting it in with this, and just make a little bit of a fruity, milky, cereal-y type of thing with some probiotic kefir of probably goat milk that I got at the farmer's market, and just play with things. This is really awesome. This will probably, you can store this in the fridge, probably no more than 3 days, 4 days. Actually, what you could do as well, and just experiment with, because everything is raw. Interesting thing is that if you leave raw ingredients out on room temperature and they ferment, right? What's actually going to happen is that they don't go bad, because they're just kind of being preserved by the natural bacteria that are in the environment and the food itself. It just starts breaking things down and decomposing it in a way that actually doesn't make it bad. Unless, I mean, it depends. It always depends a bit on what actually is going to be growing on there, granted. But generally, this is one of the things I noticed. Like if I made cashew milk, for instance, this is one of the things that I would leave it on my countertop. It would just ferment, and I would actually enjoy that also as a probiotic food. And that was something that I tried probably like a year ago. I only did it once as a suggestion from one of my teachers at the time. And so that's okay. Now with cooked food, if you leave that out, there's not going to be any enzymes in there. The natural composition of everything is just going to be altered, so that is when we see that food will decompose really bad and really quickly. It's with cooked foods. When the foods are raw, I find that's just not quite the same thing. So you can experiment with this. You could allow your cacao, coconut milk to ferment at room temperature. See how it tastes like on day 4. You know, maybe you'll enjoy it with a couple of days fermentation, a little bit of frizziness before you know, you actually gulp it down. So again, I encourage people to just play with your food. You know, make it an art, make it an expression of who you are, incorporate it into your lifestyle, and let's not look at food and eating well as a chore, but rather as just another creative outlet for us. So that's going to be a nice little snack, and hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know how it turns out for you if you decide to do it. Cheers, guys.